Head külalised, dear guests, the song you just heard was won by Andrei Illarionov, a well-known and loved Russian bard who sang to us about his country has gone mad. Moja strana sashla s uma. Written in the beginning of September, this song has been viewed almost 1 million times on YouTube so far. Written in the beginning of September, it became very popular. And I am glad this lets us believe that there are a lot of people in Russia who haven't gone mad, who support Makarevich's view on current situation, and who don't consider him to be so-called enemy of the state. I would also like to say some words about the map behind my back. It's a website created by a team of software engineers in Dnipropetrovsk. They have been live mapping events relevant to the conflict since February, and it is a non-profit, voluntary-run project of civic journalism that also looks for at least 2 independent sources in order to verify an event that actually happened. There are also Estonian Facebook pages, Ukrainian news and news from Ukraine, and they are very much alive thanks to the enthusiasm and sometimes 16-hour workdays of their creators. And the goal behind these efforts and these examples is the same: to give fact-based information about what is going on. Somehow the enormous money-smelling and controlled Russian state propaganda and hate speech need to be balanced. However, this fight reminds of the one between David and Goliath, or giants and hobbits, as we have named today's first discussion panel. Russian people are being kept loyal and/or afraid by conducting a careful control over media, education, and parties inside Russia. The rest of the world is being offered a more cunning soft approach by large-scale funding for international broadcasting, for funding international Western intellectuals, think tanks, and Orthodox Church, by bribing current and former politicians and businesses, and by using its new media to spread its influence online. And we can also observe that principles and vocabulary of human rights, self-determination, civil society is overturned and have been used in diametrically opposite meaning. How to deal with that manipulation? Here today we have a good chance to redefine the term soft power, a concept developed in 1990 by Joseph Nye of Harvard University to describe the ability to attract, persuade, and cooperate. Today you can ask, should we differentiate between legitimate and illegitimate, value-based and dirty soft power? How would we answer the question, what should be our strategy against the attacks to free and open society? Estonian President Toomas Hendrik Ilves has often quoted Marcus Aurelius on, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." But would it be sometimes justified to change shapes when faced with such an underhand enemy? We hope we will find some answers, or at least hear different ones today. So let me wish inspiring Thursday afternoon and bid that the debate and discussions today extend over a longer time and go to wider audiences. I would also like to express my joy about having so many colleagues from Open Society Foundation Network with us today, from Croatia, Slovakia, Poland, the US, Latvia, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Brussels. Welcome. Dear guests, now I'll continue some technical information. Our event is streamed on our homepage and all big Estonian news portals, and please feel free to tweet. Since our president will be able to join us only for the panel, we're all counting on you. Our working languages are English and Estonian. The first panel will be held in English, the second one in Estonian. And if you have not yet done so, please equip yourself with the headphones. After the forum, approximately at 6 o'clock, we cordially invite you to the lobby next door to continue our discussions and debates. And last but not least, this forum today is a joint effort of many people, and I would like to extend our gratitude to all who have contributed to this event today. First of all, our very distinguished guests and speakers, thank you so much. Our good partners, and also the very dedicated board and staff of the Open Estonia Foundation, thank you so much. One last remark. The colors in this room are not entirely accidental. Orange is the color of our foundation, and it is directly connected to the 2004 Ukrainian Revolution. For us, it is a color of change and hope. So I wish that the future hold them both. Dear guests, now it is my great pleasure to introduce Joe Andrews. Joe is a former well-known news journalist who now is the director of Ariadne, the European Human Rights Funder Network. Ariadne currently has a membership of 300 grant makers and donors across Europe. And Joe specialized in coverage of politics, working out of Westminster, in Washington, D.C., and Brussels. She will introduce our keynote speaker, Andrei Illarionov, and later moderate the first discussion panel of the day. I am sure that besides interesting ideas and the political reality being grim, you will get a good share of her British sense of humor. Thank you for your attention, and let's proceed with food for thought. Joe, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Mel. I am really delighted to be here. My parents were in Estonia in the 1970s, and it's long been my aim to come here so that I can report back to them on what changes there have been in Estonia since then, and what amazing changes there have been. I have to confess to you that it was something of a wrench, though, to leave the United Kingdom last night, as when I return tomorrow, it may be a country that no longer exists. Today is the day the Scots decide if they wish to leave the Union and claim independence after 300 years. So perhaps you will forgive me if I sneak a look at my phone from time to see what the turnout is. I'm not sure whether they want or need the support of the Donetsk People's Republic. It's my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, Andrei Illarionov, and to wish him a very happy birthday for earlier this week. He reached an impressive number of years on Tuesday. I know this because on the same day, I reached a slightly more impressive number of years myself. We share a birthday, but the worlds we were born into were deeply different. Andrei was born and brought up close to St. Petersburg. An economics specialist, he became an academic and economic advisor to different parts of the Russian government. And in 2000, he became Vladimir Putin's senior economic advisor and his personal representative in the G8. 5 years later, he resigned, saying that Russia was no longer a democratic or free country, but run by an authoritarian elite. Andrei is now senior researcher of the Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. And in this role, he has become a thorn in Mr. Putin's side, taking part in dissenters' marches, signing the online anti-Putin manifesto. In the past few months, he's accurately predicted the Russian military operation in Ukraine and also said that the start of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine would ultimately result in Russian occupation or political control over the entire Ukraine. So listen carefully to what he has to say, because what he predicts next will probably come true. Andrei.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Joe, for this nice and kind introduction. Please accept my congratulations as well. It's a special honor to have the same birthday with you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished guests, it's a very special honor and high pleasure for me to be again here in Tallinn and to have an opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the issue that unfortunately forces us quite urgently to pay absolutely necessary attention to the issue, the main issue of our discussion today, the issue of information or disinformation war that is being waged right now at unprecedented level. I've been asked initially by organizers to try to concentrate also on what can be done by a relatively small country with rather limited resources in a way to counteract to information war. What can be done in this more and more increasingly hostile information environment, and how to defend critically important information positions here in Estonia, and maybe not only in Estonia. After carefully thinking, I came to my response that maybe would be not very optimistic for some people, but nevertheless, I hope it would provide some food for thought, for discussion, especially for reconsidering some of very important and maybe basic principles of the liberal democratic society that we cherish so much, and we think that is the best possible political, social and economic model to live in. It's a very, very important challenge and very important problem, so that is why please consider those thoughts not as a ready answer for all existing questions, but just invitation to just really have a brainstorming session or number of sessions to see what might and should be done, might be and should be done in this new environment. I have basically 10 main points, 10 main theses, which I would like to share with you. The first one is very simple, even it is unpleasant. Information war that we're talking about is the war. It is very unpleasant, but it's a fact of life. It means that all features, characteristics, elements of classical war or any other types of wars are mostly or fully applicable to information war. It means that in the information war, we're dealing with the same element that we're dealing with classical war. In other words, like information attacks, information aggression, information offensive, information front or information fronts, information defense, information resistance, information retreat, information adversaries, information enemies, information allies, information victories and information defeats, information victims, information troops, information brigades, divisions, and so on, armies, information battlefields, theater of information actions, information weapon or weapons, information terror or information terrorism, agents of information war, special information operations, subversive information operations, information spetsnaz. Many of those terms that I've used, it's not only some kind of creation for this particular session, but they have been borrowed from the literature that are abound right now from those authors who are writing on information war. Actually, in Russia does exist quite a substantial literature on information war, how to wage it. In the Russian case, since it's quite clear that Russia became the first serious victim of this new type of information war, we do see many of these terms in reality. I would not repeat it because many of you are familiar with this. I would like to attract your attention to one of the most important features when we are dealing with such units and representatives of such units like the first Russian TV channel, or TV Russia Today, or VGTRK, or Voice of Russia. We are dealing not with traditional journalistics, not with the traditional mass media. We're dealing with information troops. And we are dealing with attacks, with offensive. First of all, definitely on the Russian population, on those who are usually forced or regularly watch or listen to or read the products of these information troops, but also around the world. The most important conclusion from this very first point, and we'll come back to that later, which is immediately somewhat a deviation from the traditional approach in the liberal democratic society. It is a necessity for such a society to have adequate information resistance, information defense, information counter-strategy, information resources that are independent, resources or information channels that are independent from information aggressor and information aggression. Absence of such resistance, absence of such defense leads to many information victims. Finally, to information defeat. That is a precondition for defeat in many other areas. My second point, the main purpose of the information war is not to capture territories per se, as it is in a classical war, but to capture people. To capture people through capture of their conscious, of their brains, of their systems of vision, of their values, regardless of the territories where those people live. Those who are exposed to such information offensive, information war, might turn out to be victims of this information offensive if necessary counteracts are not implemented. It turned out that one of the most flexible parts of human body, very easily exposed to the impacts of information war, is conscious and brains, unlike some other parts of our body. For almost half a century, maybe more, after the Second World War, after Fulton's speech of Winston Churchill, many people in the West, and not only in the West, in the East as well, did believe that effective brainwashing might be effective and successful only in the closed society. in the information isolation. When information resources and channels are monopolized, behind the walls, whether it is Berlin Wall or Chinese Wall, or this is a Iron Curtain. In a situation when there is no enough competing information sources and channels. So that is why very important element of the strategy of the free world versus non-free world was to destruct all those walls, all those curtains. Because that would guarantee the free competition of different informational sources, channels, and would give an opportunity for people in the non-free world freely choose information that they would like to choose, that they would see as most adequate, founded, and so on. What we have learned in the last 20 or 25 years, that the real life happened to be quite a different one. The greatest unpleasant surprise and the most important, again, unpleasant discovery of the last couple of decades and so was and is the fact that effective brainwashing of millions of people, of tens of millions of people, could happen anywhere, regardless of existent borders, curtains, walls. Administrative limitations of the information space almost do not exist. In Russia, at least, they do not exist in reality. Certainly, there is a monopolization of TV channels, of radio channels, of main printed media, but there is no information, almost no restrictions and limitations, for example, for social networks at the moment. Nevertheless, millions of people happen to be infected or intoxicated by this information, by this disinformation, by falsification, by outright lies. And this is a very serious question for all of us to think what can be done in this new situation when people in a so-called normal or almost normal environment happen to be becoming victims of information war. Third point is a very basic one. The roots of the information war, of the modern information warfare and information troops in Russia lie in the Soviet times. That time, for a long time, existed special units for specpropaganda, special institutions and universities and faculties and universities that are preparing specialists for specpropaganda. Some people counted that at this moment, these different versions of specpropaganda that actually have been cancelled in the early 90s in Russia now are being taught in 74 institutions and educational centers in Russia. They teach military personnel, journalists, war correspondents, psychologists, philologists in the elements how to perform information war. Information war, it is my next point, is the essential and looks like the most essential element of the hybrid war. There is a lot of discussion about the nowadays war. It's not only classical war, but it also has many elements of the so-called hybrid war, with using subversive actions, with using corruption as a way of controlling the leadership of country that has been chosen as a victim. Energy war, economic war, financial war, and many other elements of this. Also, information war is a crucial element of the so-called Fourth World War. In the terminology of the Kremlin propaganda people, the wars that they are engaged right now, it's not only Russian-Ukrainian war that we do understand that is underway, but they do consider this Russian-Ukrainian part is the introductory chapters of the beginning of the Fourth World War. And Mr. Jurgens, that spoke a few days ago in Kiev in the YES conference, said openly to the public, we are waging war not against Ukraine. Ukraine just happened to be here. We're waging war against Anglo-Saxon civilization, against Atlantic civilization, against the West. So, but before these, according to their understanding and their propaganda and their concept, this Fourth World War becomes the real war. The information war has been studied many years ago. It is underway at a very high level right now. What is the definition of the information warfare? I borrowed it from one of the so-called texts that can be considered as a textbook. Information warfare is influencing the consciousness of the masses as part of the rivalry between the different civilizational systems adopted by different countries in the information space by use of special means to control information resources as information weapons. It's a pretty sophisticated and developed concept of the information war. All those, not all, some of them mentioning methods that are employed in information war. Social control, meaning influencing society. Social maneuvering, meaning intentional control of the public aimed at gaining certain benefits. Information manipulation, meaning using authentic information in a way that gives rise and base to false implications. Disinformation, meaning spreading manipulated or fabricated information or its combination. Fabrication of information, meaning creating false information. Also such elements like lobbying, blackmailing, extortion of desired information, information terror. Very important element among those is information war is the first genuinely world war. In fact, it's the first real total war. Even compared to the First World War, Second World War, or Third World War, that is, some people would claim the Cold War was the Third World War. Due to its inherent character, information spreads without limits, borders. Therefore, information war has no flanks or rear. Information war can have everywhere front lines. The most frequent characteristics of the modern society is information society. Society and their members are engaged in producing, processing, transporting, spreading, consuming information. Modern human being can be called Homo informaticus. Therefore, information war reaches all corners of modern information society. Every human being, at least every literate human being engaged in information process, is exposed to a different extent to the impact of the information war. Even more literate and more engaged in information process are more exposed. Certainly there are possible limitations, and one of the very important limitations, at least at initial stages, is language. Because people do receive information, process information, consuming information, mostly, not exclusively, but mostly in particular language or languages. Certainly visual information can be consumed by everybody regardless of the command of language, but substantial portion of information is consumed in one particular language. These limitations have been overcome by development of resources that are spreading disinformation in different languages, not only in Russian, but Russia today now works in English, in Spanish, in French, in Arabic. Now it's going to broadcast in German. And the thousands and tens of thousands of members of disinformation brigades that are working in networks, in social networks, they're working in languages in each society in Europe, in North America, and now in many other countries. Some basic characteristics of the modern information warfare. It is very cheap compared to other methods of war, and that is why it's very attractive. It looks like it's a universal weapon because it can really reach different goals, get different targets. Information war has unlimited range. Information is easily accessible and permeates all state borders without any serious restrictions. It is very intensive. By the current level of intensity, information war is at the level unseen, unheard, at least in the last several decades of the existence of the Soviet Union. It might be comparable, certainly we need to think about the indicators, measures, scales, maybe comparable with campaign against enemies of people in the 1930s, and with campaign against doctors, murderers, or cosmopolites in the late 1940s. Certainly it's rather hard to make some kind of a strong statement about that, but at least those people who do remember those campaigns in the 1930s and 40s, they're saying that, right, it looks like it's something similar to what they experienced in their early days. At least in the last several decades of the USSR, it has not been observed. Scale of the information war is unprecedented. First of all, due to the progress in mass communications, TV, radio, social networks, video, and so on. Historically, it's the widest and deepest. Effectiveness of information war. Once again, here we need to look into appropriate indicators and scales. But if we look into the result of sociological polls in Russia, and even in some other countries, we do see very substantial changes that we did not expect even a few years ago. And now it works not only in Russia, not only in some post-Soviet states, but also in Central and Western Europe, in North America, in some other regions of the world. Another very important element of the modern information war is very particular emotional character. As a rule, reaching sometimes level of hysteria. And this is on purpose, because this is a very important and very effective way to avoid rational thinking of those who are exposed to information offensive. It is an increase in use of generally taboo vocabulary, especially such terms like Nazi, fascist, and so on. It's a very massive use of the term that usually in the modern discussions are being avoided. Another very important feature of the modern information war is scale of falsifications. And even those people who do remember what happened in the early days of the Soviet Union, even in Stalin's times, saying that the scale of falsifications is unseen. It is not only distortion of information or some kind of presenting in a very wrong way the real facts, but creation on mass scale of absolute new reality, or so-called reality. During this Russian-Ukrainian chapter of this war, we have seen that some of the information resistance units produced, first of all, the list of 20 pieces of lies of Mr. Putin's propaganda. After that, 14 lies. After that, 60s, 80s, 100s, and so on. And those cases are very carefully master-mined pieces with pieces of video of pictures taken from Chechnya, Dagestan, Kabardino-Balkaria, Syria, Yugoslavia, from Ukraine several years before, creating absolutely new reality, so providing new description, presenting them as a fact of life today in Ukraine or during this war. It means that huge resources, human, financial, organizational, are engaged in this process of fabricating and so-called creating new falsified reality. Certainly, a new level of technological development plays a role, and methods of distributing and spreading this disinformation, like social networks with the help of brigades and so on. The purpose of information war: changing perception and brainwashing of people, converting some of them into this new ideology, into support, into loyalty, securing neutrality of others, mobilization of supporters, and demobilization of adversaries, pushing adversaries or enemies of information aggressor from the information battlefields. And this is a very important element, because the methods that are being used against the so-called normal people who are trying to to ask questions and to find out what is reality is a very aggressive, cynical attacks that lead many people to leave this battlefield. Because for many of those people engaging in conversation, in this debate, it's not for for joy to feel attacks of such kind. And many people who are psychologically are not prepared for that, just living this so-called information space. And it is exactly what is the purpose of this information warfare. We have seen how it is in the Russian blogosphere. Landscape has changed over the last 10 or 15 years. 15 years ago, in the early year 2000s, it was almost exclusively the place with very intelligent discussion, with a very tolerant rules, where people really involved were interested in finding truth. Around year 2003, there was a massive information attack from a very incredibly low level, with very obscene lexics and so on, that led to most of those people who were engaged in this discussion early on just left this battlefield. And for a number of years, anyone who would look into this debate would get an impression that all or almost all Russian society of incredibly low primitive level. And they're using a very primitive and aggressive language in their communications. That was exactly the purpose of this information campaign. Information war is one of the most fundamental challenges to the liberal democratic society. Why? One of the great principles that has been proclaimed even back during the time of Enlightenment, for example, in the words of Voltaire, "I don't agree with you, but I am ready to sacrifice my life in order to give you a right to express yourself." We all know this principle, and we're trying to follow this principle in our life. But nowadays, in the situation of the information war, following this principle literally means not only to commit suicide, virtual or real information suicide, but also to provide essential assistance to information terrorists. That's a very serious challenge. There is a very serious problem. Individuals, whole nations, societies that do not defend themselves against information war are doomed to be defeated. And we have seen how it happened in Russia and how it is going on in some other places beyond Russian borders. And the first of all defeat comes in information war, then in other areas of the so-called World War IV. It is necessary to reconsider or just to start to discuss how this most basic principle of liberal society, freedom of expression, freedom to speak, freedom to disseminate information, can be preserved, but not at the expense of dissemination of disinformation, clear falsifications, and clear lie. Once again, this is an invitation for very serious brainstorming. My last point here would be basic elements of the information resistance or information defense strategy. The first one, coming to understanding that this is a war. It is not a joke, it's not a game, it's not a relaxation in the evening just with computer and with social networks. This is a real war. And unfortunately, even those people who do not want to participate in this war need to behave as they are in the war. You are in the army now. Second point, in many cases, people do confront not journalists, but spetspropaganda people, information spetsnaz, as they call themselves, information troops. Just imagine for a second, it's not yet 2014, but 1940, late autumn 1940, and we are in Britain, in your Britain. When Britain was probably one of two last or three free societies, free countries on the European continent, where almost all continents have been taken by either Nazi Germany or by Stalin USSR. What would be your response to German journalists, let's say from Völkische Beobachter, to come to British Islands, let's say to Southampton or to the southern coast, to report and to provide some kind of the information about that? Probably Brits did not do it, did not allow. It's a limitation. It's quite clear limitations. We need to think what could be done, what might be done, what should be done in this new situation. Because they are not journalists. They are representative of information troops. Another very important and very kind of challenging and very serious issue, people. People are very different. Different human beings are different, not in terms of their rights. They are equal. But in terms of their psychological and psychophysical ability to resist information war, disinformation, falsification. Some people can do it, some people cannot. And some people are very easily becomes victims of disinformation. Some people are able to resist. It's certainly necessary to undertake special studies, but based on the Russian experience, we can say that probably not more than 50% of the Russian society more or less able to resist this disinformation war. Others are not. And this is a question. As for these 15%, they are able to defend themselves, at least, maybe some of their close one, colleagues and so on, but what can be done to defend, to protect those 55% that are not able to defeat themselves from this falsification. One of the immediate action that many, not all, but some of those 85% in the Russian society are taking is limit as much as possible their exposure to information attacks, to information offensive. If you would ask many Russian people whether they watch TV, many of them said, no, I do not watch Russian TV. And they have a very conscious choice to limit themselves from this exposure. It's like a very natural reaction of the healthy or conscious human being to limit exposure to infection, whether it's a plague or cholera or whatever, just to limit contact with something that is very infectious and very toxic. And this is exactly, it's an intoxication. Intoxication not only of body, but of the brain, one of the most important parts of human being. For those who are able to resist and able to understand, it is a necessary element of monitoring and analysis of the information or disinformation product. Because it's necessary to produce product to counteract this disinformation. In February and March year 2014, I strongly recommended to Ukrainian authorities to create some kind of unit that would deal with the Russian propaganda and the Russian disinformation. That time, Ukrainian authorities refused to do it. As a result, appeared private units like InfoResist, Information Resistance, that started to analyze pieces of this Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation and produce on a timely basis, on a regular basis, tens and hundreds of studies showing how this information war against Ukraine works. If there is a really huge scale of this information war, probably private initiative is not enough. Another element, it's a rule of engagement, rules of engagement with information attackers and terrorists. But what is the most important here is not to lose information space, information battlefield to attackers. And the very final point, how the final victory in this information war can be achieved. We know a lot can be done, but the final victory can come only if Russia, sooner or later, will be free and democratic country. Free democratic countries do not wage wars and do not wage information wars. Thank you. Thank you.